let me set this up too, that because my next comments, I don't want to get Mike in trouble here. Mike's here as a DoD employee who spent some time at K2 and has been involved in trying to get VA and Congress to recognize, the Department of Defense to recognize some of the challenges at K2 that I'm going to have him talk about here. He's not here giving any endorsements, any political opinions on behalf of anybody but himself. He's not endorsing any of the veteran radio sponsors. He's not taking political positions between different administrations. This is a discussion about what he saw, what he knows, and kind of trying to inform our veteran radio listeners about a place that they've probably never heard of, K2 in Uzbekistan, so that you can be educated about this situation. And when you land at the base, Mike, nobody's thinking about toxic base problems, and unfortunately, the DoD has a long history of toxic base problems that raise their heads many years later. It's just not something you think about or they think about in the middle of the heat of the moment. And at some point after you leave K2, when do you become aware of or start thinking about, boy, there were some problems there, and maybe those problems actually showed themselves while you were there?
Sure. Yeah, there were some problems. We'll start off with the problems that occurred there, and then how I basically finally got back around to this almost 20 years later. We had a long C-17 flight from the U.S. To K2. We were too heavy to take off fully loaded and not enough priority for an in-flight, so we hopped around the world, and about the 15 of us on the plane with all of our equipment picked up a few additional passengers. And the U.S. government never goes to war without a lawyer, and one of them was a JAG.
Well, we have a good union. That's why.
Yeah. Well, so he was on a long flight that we circled the globe and made many stops on, and got to know him at least by name. And we started off doing our separate jobs, and I was in a different area of the little small area. First thing is, we didn't own the whole base. The Americans were confined to an area roughly only about 40 acres on the base. And when you think of an air base, that's huge. I mean, the area that we were in was small, but an air base is huge. So we were corralled into a very small area. And the government, or us, decided for force protection measures that we needed a berm around our area. So one of the first jobs that the JAG had was to arrange for local contractors to bring in equipment. And in Uzbekistan, a lot of that equipment was some guy with a shovel, and start building a berm around the roughly 40 acres in which we were to live in. And the area we were to live in had no housing, was all dirt, was being improved by U.S. military Corps of Engineer and CB type folks daily, attempting to get a camp up on a little piece of this airbase. So back to the JAG, I just continued or concluded some night operations and was coming back for some needed sleep when he stopped me walking across our little 40 acres and said, "Mike, I'd like your help. I know you can reach back to Washington. I've hired some contract workers to dig the berm around the place or build the berm around the place, and they're falling over getting sick." So I said, well, I can see what I can do. So then I had a series of areas where I would call back to Washington and try and get information on the base history, on what was where, and where in various locations around the base, and what was there, its history, so to speak, and then relay that on to the JAG, where he could make some determinations about what they should do about the work and the workers. That raised some attention, and almost within a week of me being there working with him, he introduced me to another guy, and this one was another military officer, and He was from the Center of Health and Preventive and Protective Medicine Europe out of UCOM. And he and a team were environmental specialists that were going to do a survey of the base. Now, this was our area at the base. Now, remember, this is after we've already been there and are growing every day. So the first survey was not done before we got there. It was done while we were getting there and building there. So I relayed the various information on the base's history to the CHIPMS officer on a daily basis while he and his team went out and surveyed. And I also recommended areas where they could do some soil samples and do some test digging to see what was in the dirt and what was making the workers sick. The area smelled, much like the Soviet Union would, but there's definitely a smell of petroleum in the air to begin with, but that would be expected to be at a jet base, but it was bad.
Like what you heard? Listen to this full episode and more on the Apple Podcasts app, Blog Talk Radio, Google Podcasts, or iHeartRadio. And now streaming on Amazon Music, Audible, and Spotify.